Thanks a lot for your punctual appearance after the break. I now have to introduce myself and Klaus. We will lead you, with Klaus starting, I think, through the conceptual model of the architecture document 2505, which has been recently, actually yesterday, been approved by the board. Many of you know the approval process, but what's behind the content, that is where Klaus and I want to explain a little bit the thinking, the rationale, and giving an explanation. So you do not have to read the architecture document at all, but just memorize. He's a very strong curator of the architecture. And please, Klaus, I don't think I need to introduce the Klaus. Do I? No. This it. We're doing a double conference, you know.
Funny things I was thinking of is that
it's up is on.
I know, but I'm too stupid.
But maybe we change it.
We change. Okay. Perhaps, yes. So one of the funny things that I don't see Manuel in the audience anymore, but for those of you who have been here, one of the funny things is I'm really perhaps together with Alban, one of the people who have been longest with all these different Gaia endeavors, and this, if you remember, the blue and orange with the green petals in between, pictures of Gaia-X from 2020. It reminded me of that we had, when we were starting, we had a little bit of a different concept what Gaia-X really means. So we thought about Gaia-X is doing the European cloud, was mentioned by some of the governments at one point in time. Gaia-X is doing all kinds of sectorial data spaces and value-added services. And in the meantime, a lot of things have been developed. You have seen the vision of Ulrich this morning. And what we have perhaps not done very, very well across all the different years is adapting the architectures, the conceptual models, the way we're describing the backend of Gaia-X in line with the way on how the original purpose has been shifting over the years. And this is why this is my long introduction for the little term inside the brackets. We have a new conceptual model. If you think about the old one, for all of you who have read the old architecture document, we've been describing consumers and providers of data. We have been describing federated services. We've been describing the different types of clearinghouses. And in reality, if we come back to the vision of Gaia-X, all of that does not describe the core of what we are doing with the trust framework. It did not describe on how the compliance document or the policy rule committee helps us to, here's the vision statement, enable trusted, decentralized digital ecosystems. And the focus on the new conceptual model is actually exactly to describe how we are enabling trusted. The term trust has been discussed quite a few times in quite a few contexts, and contrary to Christoph, I believe we have a definition what trust means. Decentralized, so not a single system that is controlling everything, and also not a distributed system. Trusted, decentralized digital ecosystems. And what we will see to walk through in the explanation of the new conceptual model is how we're making this vision happening. Next to the vision, there's of course also the mission, and it actually has two parts. It's on the one hand side, create de facto standard to enable federated trusted infrastructure ecosystems, but it's also talking about specifications. This is what an architecture document is about. This is what conceptual models are about. And verification framework. This is the way on how you can implement the idea of trusted decentralized ecosystems. What is not part of architecture, what is part of the second part of the groups within Gaia-X is actually how to define policy and rules for Gaia-X compliance. So what I want to show is that on the left-hand side of the Gaia-X framework, this is published on the website, what is called technical compliance. We will talk about the specifications and the verifications framework. We will explain how that connects to the compliance document, to the policy work of the policy rule committee, but we will also explain how individual digital ecosystems can use Gaia-X to implement their own idea of digital trust for their ecosystem. So left-hand side, architecture document, technical committee, specifications, verification frameworks, whereas here we have Gaia-X policy rules and the compliance and labels specifications. Now I'm jumping one too much. I'm so long-winded about this one because, as I mentioned, I want to repeat this. There is a second part. We have seen many, many different ecosystems, data spaces representing what they are doing with Gaia-X. But one of the key things what we are implementing as this part of the verification framework and standards is that we can use all the technologies, the conceptual model that I'm describing, to provide individual ecosystems the tools to automate the process of onboarding. Not just do I trust everybody to say he's a nice guy to work in my healthcare ecosystem, but to validate that a participant fulfills all the requirements of a specific individual ecosystem to onboard to the systems. If we are actually talking about digital ecosystems, we have this notion of federated services, we have the notion of catalogs, we have the notion of authorization servers, policy information points, and many, many, many others. But who tells us that we can actually trust these services that are provided in a specific regulatory context? Do we know that the catalog can only be accessed by people who have been proven that they fulfill all the standards, for instance, for a healthcare domain? And last but not least, an individual ecosystem will also need to make sure, if we come to the exchange of data, Pierre has been talking about trusted data transactions. Do I really trust the statements that are made if somebody is presenting their data or requesting data for their own processing? So the one big takeaway, and I really want to stress this, is that in the conceptual model, next to the usage for Gaia-X standards and verification framework for the Gaia-X compliance and the Gaia-X labels, we have the same conceptual model, we have the same architecture, we have the same open source that can actually be used to implement these features, these use cases for the individual ecosystems. And Christoph wants to say...
You remember when I mentioned about why we should care about trust, I mentioned the term transaction costs. These are 3 examples of transactions where the cost will be reduced to virtually 0 if you automate it using any trust, using the Gaia-X trust framework. These are the transactions whose transaction costs will be reduced and annihilated. So, thanks.
What have we done to come to a new, Klaus, what have we done to come to a new version of the conceptual model? We have looked at the architectures of many of the existing lighthouse projects and upcoming projects, the systems that have been implementing data spaces and infrastructure ecosystems, and you see a set of common patterns, how a trust framework is working together with different type of identity providers, how we use credential stores, wallets, that, by the way, we're not describing in the architecture document. We assume there's a wallet, but we don't describe it in the architecture document. So what we did is we looked at all the different implementations, try to really take an outside-in view how can we describe the elements inside the architecture that each and every ecosystem can use it for their own purposes to support the use cases that I've been describing, and very, very specifically how the ecosystems can take the decision what it actually takes in order to be compliant and in line with the requirements of the ecosystem. So, just a repeat, specifications, verification framework is what we're discussing. If we talk about digital ecosystems, the biggest starting point is, of course, an ecosystem always has something that actually agrees on the common policies, rules, agreements between partners. And by the way, if we all look at ourselves, I'm part of a healthcare ecosystem, of an energy ecosystem, of a mobility ecosystem, of the ecosystem of German taxpayers. So most of us work in many different ecosystems. But the key point is each of the systems has somebody who's defining the rules. What does it take to belong to an ecosystem? And they express that in a set of specific rules. For identities, you have to be born in Europe. For healthcare, you have to have a specific regulation. For aerospace, you need to have a different regulation. So the ecosystems define actually what we call, as a general term, conformity assessment schemes. It's something that's also used in the standardization terms like ISO and so on and so forth. And the conformity scheme is actually looking at different type of criteria, just like in the policy document, but criteria could be, are you located in a specific location? Have you signed a specific interoperability contract? Are you following technical standards? Are you operating services by ISO, whatever? Just like we have in the PRC, it has the conformity assessment scheme defined by the governance authority, defines a set of criteria, which then have associated with them the rules, what does it take to fulfill a criteria, and actually how this statement, the compliance of this criteria by conformity rules, how these statements can be validated. And this is, in short, the description on how Gaia-X technical compatibility has implemented the rules of the compliance document, but it's also, in short, the generalized version that each and every ecosystem can take for themselves to define what does it take that I give somebody access to my systems or access to my data. Very, very critical point in this one is, okay, the authority, the specific authority has defined a conformity assessment schema, which has criteria or labels, conformity rules, validation methods. Who do we actually trust in order to make that validations? So the definition of trust that Christoph used, it's not the way it's also been used in the mission, in the introduction of this document. Gaia-X is implementing trust. It's providing a verification framework. It has somebody who's delegated by the ecosystem authority to make an assertion that yes, this statement that has been made is actually validated. Different types of levels, could be self-description, could be a list of permissible standards, could be technically verifiable attributes, or can be specific rule sets. But this is the core of how the technology that we're describing in architecture does the translation of the enablement of digital of trust for decentralized digital ecosystems through standards and a verification framework. Examples of the governance authorities, because it's been perhaps a little bit abstract. So in the AISBL, the policy rule committee is the governance authority that defines the compliance document. The AISBL is the association that defines the digital clearing houses, the services that can issue the trust for the different participants. Other examples could be data space governance authority, like I've mentioned a few times, or could be an infrastructure initiative, like the EOSC could say that in order for us to participate in my ecosystem, you need to sign this kind of contract, need to do this and that, and need to have technical specifications. So MARC could be one of such governance authorities. Could. We have a definition of ecosystems as this group of people with a common interest. So we have that definition. We didn't call it data space authority, or we didn't call it infrastructure ecosystem authority, because it's general applicable. You could even take it one step further, because of course we are not the only standard verification framework, trust framework out in the world. We heard the speech about IDAS. IDAS, in a sense, is also a trust framework which is following very, very much the same principles. This definition of what the Gaia-X verification framework is actually also providing the link to other trust frameworks where we can build interoperability with other systems, and that's why we're using so generic terms like ecosystem. Okay. Examples: Gaia-X compliance document, data space specific rule sets. We have examples. We have ecosystems who are using exactly the same technologies. One example I know is everybody has signed a paper legal framework contract to say I'm compliant for this specific scope. Gets a credential issued by a trust service provider, has made compliance to the domain standards, so technical compliance that I'm using, ISO, whatever, or aerospace standards or whatsoever, gets a credential once it's approved by an independent conformity assessment body, and so on and so forth. Could, by the way, also regional regulation compliance, so we are working in Europe. A lot of what's currently inside the compliance document is Europe focused, but if we want to cooperate with other regional ecosystems, the generic framework, as I'm describing it here, also allows other regions to use the same technology to provide technical compatibility with this framework. Important, I mentioned this before, is that we're not just defining criteria, we're not just defining the rules for compliance and the different methods on validations. Each ecosystem is also defining who can actually be the party who is providing the statement of compliance to a given compliance schema. So for the Gaia-X compliance document, this is obviously the Gaia-X digital clearing houses. But if you want to have something that's, for instance, healthcare specific or identity specific, the ecosystem can also identify and define there is a specific group of trust service providers that in a given scope can actually issue the credentials to assess compliance to a specific criteria. And of course, I can agree in between ecosystems to use the same trust service provider for the same scope. So if two ecosystems can rely on the same identity provider or the same catalog provider, or it's up to them to make that determination. The box trust service provider, and I perhaps do not go through all of the list on how we have set it up, but we have made the very, very, very specific links to the source code that Gaia-X is providing through the architecture, how we distinguish between the conformity assessment bodies that are actually providing a validation of the code and how they can use notaries, for instance, to issue the credentials. I mentioned it in passing. There's what you always have to look at is scope. We're not saying there's one trust service provider for an ecosystem. It could be a trust service provider for identity, could be a trust service provider for compliance to a specific regulation, could be as many as you want. You define your scope and you can mix and match based on your ecosystem requirements what it takes to make yourself compliance. We can embed out of the ISO, of the traditional Casco world, conformity assessment bodies. And because we had the term proxies before, the model, this is not in the conceptual model, but you see this little line here that says trust chaining. We are explicitly allowing the chaining of different trust service providers so that if you have one authority that says for the company of Aruba, it's person ABC who is in charge, but he can delegate, that person can delegate the trust through a list of linked trust service providers that it controls. It's a very important mechanism on how you can implement proxy authorization, how you can delegate authorities throughout the organizations, fully under your control. You define it in your registry, in your schema, and you use this model to extend as you like it. You as in governance, ecosystem governance authority. So a little bit in less detail and easier to read, but the same message. Data space governance authorities define criteria, compliance, rules, validation methods, and trust service providers. We have the necessary registry that is maintaining all the information about what are the attributes, so what is the schema, what are the trust service providers, what are the providers we are trusting to issue services. We have open source and a service which will actually make an evaluation of all the individual criteria. Think about Gaia-X compliance level 1, 2, 3 to actually issue a credential based on composite criteria. And of course, we have the services that allow us to issue credentials on individual attributes based on the notary function. And these are the elements that make up these standards and the technical implementation of the trust framework. For the use cases, automated onboarding, definition of all the services that make up, that are provided by a trusted operator of the ecosystem to provide catalogs, authorization services, policy information points, and so on and so forth, and to validate attributes in any kind of trust, not only trusted data transactions, in any kind of data transactions. I'll come to the model of conceptual model of data transactions in a second. Just one highlight. If you are a user, and I mentioned before, we're all users of multiple data spaces. You can collect credentials into your wallet. Perhaps you will use your identity wallet for all the data spaces you're in. You will have a automotive a credential only for your automotive data space. And the key message is you as a participant become owner of your wallet, and you will use the credentials in an individual combination to declare or to approve or to have the membership into a specific ecosystem approved by the respective authorities. No? We have so many examples where you're part of a manufacturing and an aerospace and an energy data space, so you don't have to duplicate and multiply everything. You just collect the necessary credentials in order to allow the respective onboarding. And with that, we also allow, of course, that you can really set up systems of federated ecosystems. And if the transaction between data happens between two participants on this level, you can rely on a agreed upon set of shared service providers, like shared catalogs, like shared authentication providers, and so on and so forth, that are approved by a federated set of trust service providers defined by multiple governance authorities. Very, very important. You have one common standard. Ideally, you have Gaia-X as the one common standard and verification framework. And if everybody's using the same framework, we can build federation of data spaces. That's for the read along afterwards. I've mentioned all the points and I don't want to bore you with this. It's another, this picture is another interpretation of what we've seen beforehand. And I like to really stress this. The capability to share services across different data spaces is one of the key features and one of the key benefits that you're getting out of the Gaia-X framework. And just to make it very, very explicit, it's of course also, what's the right term? Building on top of each other. It's not replacing Gaia-X credentials, that would be stupid. So all these data spaces can agree to use the existing credentials for Gaia-X compliance or for level 1, 2, 3, and they can build their own ecosystem-specific credentials on top of it. Right. I mentioned, and I mean this, not just looking at Frederick, I mean that. As much as we've been talking about the general framework to verify specific attributes, claims against attributes, this is an extremely important feature if you're looking at managing trusted data transactions. And what the data space, the Data Services Exchange Group has done is developed a model that is also reflecting all, it's not even complete here, all the respective attributes and the way on how you declare properties, attributes, in this very, very specific case, also the confirmation of a data usage agreement to all the different parties. Not every data space, I have to say this, not every data space requires this level of data usage agreements. Some will just shift around files or put a stream of data for supply chains through it, but specifically in the context of trusted data transactions, using the model, the conceptual model that I've been describing before, to also apply this to a data product model can be the, and will be hopefully the key to implement trusted data transactions. Just one thing, because this is an extension that we've also done in the architecture document. I've said before how we've been analyzing multiple projects across the board. There are very many common patterns, and we have tried to also make sure and document how what the Gaia-X standard verification trust framework does, how that interlinks with the work of other associations. This is one example how Gaia-X connects to the data space protocol. And I didn't mention a specific implementation, I just mentioned data space protocol. And we actually don't just have this for data space protocol, but for a number of other initiatives, because what we want to get to is provide with a one core conceptual model for trust, if you want to call it this way, how we can use it to support multiple type of ecosystem implementations. And it's, by the way, an agreed model going forward. So, Christoph, I don't know if you want to take the fun part.
Yep. Fun part, yeah. You can click here. What we it's a distributed system. So what I want to, and this is only 3 or 4 slides, highlight the major differences which we did in refactoring the architecture document. Refactoring, you all are engineers more or less. I think so. Refactoring means taking the concepts, parts of what exists, and rearranging that, possibly deleting a little bit, possibly adding something. And we did not need to rewrite everything in the architecture document, but just streamline especially the organization towards our two-pronged trust model. You know, the trust framework has the left column and the middle column, and you see that totally reflected in the section 4 Gaia-X trust framework architecture, and then the technical specification. If you want to determine whether something is Gaia-X technically compatible on the left pillar of the trust framework, you need to have a specification. And actually we're working also on a TCK, on a Gaia-X technical compatibility testing kit. How do you test that this is really accepting Gaia-X the credentials and all that stuff? So this is the specification you will find here, not the code yet for the TCK, but this is the specification part, which is important if we go for standardization later. So this is the old one, the old content, and actually Judita and Sumaya did most of the work of refactoring that. So it was a long 2, 3, 4 weeks for them, and also for the technical committee. But they did actually, you know, the groundwork of looking into every section and rearranging them towards the new structure. And the new structure has been extensively discussed. We have still a discussion on on topic number 3, context, because this is where all the other initiatives go. Can you give me the next slide, please? Absolutely. So the context, and you see that we had not disagreement, but initially it was called Understanding the Gaia-X Digital Ecosystem. And that would be on a higher level. You know, Gaia-X is not alone. There are other initiatives like IDSA 5 or BDVA, and the relationship of us, the potential relationships, also potential convergence, would be explained in that kind of higher level ecosystem. Because we are not the only fish in the pond. So the pond being the meta ecosystem of all these initiatives. So if someone of you really has a good idea whether to call that Understanding the Gaia-X Digital Ecosystem or context, which is a little bit, then please come forward with that. So, and you see, that's a lot of the things Klaus actually has been talking right now to do, you can read there. So if you forget what he in particular has been telling you, the trust framework architecture actually, and this is conceptually a little bit mixed, also refers at places to the compliance document or to rules, because we do not invent technical compatibility completely unaware that it needs to host, that it needs to be able to run code on certain compatibility compliance schemes, certain rule books. So we need to talk a little bit also about rules. You know, in the introductory keynote, I spoke that the architecture document is completely rule agnostic, but of course we need to provide some interfacing, and that is in that section. You can see a lot of that. What is the conceptual model? You can see all the links explained and the nice graphics. Also the Klaus data space architecture, how that relates. That has all been described. And we totally agree that you will be able, if you scrutinize that, you know, without any time pressure to be ready for the board of directors to approve that you will find a lot, no, not a lot, some inconsistencies, some terminologies, some sentences where you can provide more background. Please raise them in the architecture working group to me. There is actually a feature, if you look at the architecture document online and you click a mouse, then you can raise an issue. Maybe we should correct that. So certainly we will see revisions to that, but it was critically important for us to release that refactored element. You know how evolution is happening, evolution of us, of every living organism. It's called punctuated equilibrium. You have kind of invention of life. So that was the single cellular mechanism, and then you had kind of 3.5 billion years, and then the multicellular organism erupted. And this discontinuity is called punctuated equilibrium. You have gradual, and then you have a punctuation, and then it goes on, and then you know, in I don't know, you have the meteor 62.5 million years. You have the meteor hitting, and the saurians becoming extinct, and the mammals evolving. That's another level, you reach another level. And we reached that, I hope, maybe it's a little bit too exaggerating, but we reached a new level with that version. That does not mean that the architecture working group will not now stop working. It will be a gradual evolution until, I don't know, maybe in 2030 or no, 2028, we will see a next kind of punctuation, a next discontinuous evolvement of the architecture document, maybe with quantum computing. So that represents such a punctuation, such a discontinuity in the evolution. So it was totally important also for me to have that, because then we can start from a new basis. And I really hope, and also the feedback in the various working groups was that this represents the new basis. We are not done yet, but now the evolution is more gradual, continuous refinement and all that. Next one, please. Yeah, and the technical compatibility specification is all here. So this is very core to the tech spec. So if you're not interested in all the context information, just in the standard, I think 12 pages or 14 pages. Next one, please. We're done. Yep. Thanks for your patience, because it was a little bit theoretical, but we need that in order for someone being able to implement it. Are there any questions to me or Klaus or to yourself, to the ecosystems? Any final words, Klaus, you want to address for the audience?
What you said at the beginning, we have what I was trying to explain. We've described the conceptual model. In my honest opinion, it should work. It would work as a description that each and every of the ecosystems, so infrastructure or data space projects we've seen, could apply on their own stuff. And what's now very, very important is that we get, wherever it doesn't fit yet, wherever you need extensions, wherever we believe there's something not completely right or working, that we get the input from the projects and improve the document. We always call this the outside-in view. We're not there to tell the world how to do your stuff. I see a huge benefit if we help provide a common knowledge from the outside in, from all the projects, from everything you learn, from your requirements, that we are really ending up with terribly interoperable systems and reach the volumes of scale that are necessary to grow data, to reduce cost, to make sure that we don't waste the same skills on essentially the same stuff, 80% compatible, just as such a little piece, not that it's incompatible and just waste our own capabilities and skills. Done.
Thanks a lot. Done. Any final questions? Yeah, please, Mark. We have 2 minutes. No, honestly.
This is really quite good, and I'm very glad to hear this. I'm worried about what is going on in the world in the Data Spaces Support Center and Simple, both of which are in different places, and both of which are being, so I'm leading a data space project with the engineering funded, and I get asked every day, how are you applying the DSSC blueprint and when will you adopt Simple? And Simple, by definition, does not work like that. So, which I think is very sensible and smart, and it does, as you said, Klaus, support interoperability between ecosystems and data spaces. But that is not what Simple does right now.
Right now, Marco. But fun fact. When we had the presentation of the MVP in January, so you may remember it was very, very basic how you do onboarding. We had a quick discussion with the Simple team and said, well, everything we're doing, what I was trying to explain, this is a way on how you can get all your live projects, define your rules, do an automated onboarding. And when the Simple team came back and said, okay, just give me the documentation how we can do it, I had to admit I could have given the team roughly 100 pages of a little bit inconsistent and convoluted information because it was historically grown. With a new model, what we've been describing is actually much, much simpler to answer that question. So I do believe that this is a good mechanism, and we will engage as Gaia-X, we will engage with the Commission to explain how this framework can be used for their own purposes. There was a misperception, that's why I've also been pushing a little bit the use for specific ecosystems. So I believe we've done a little bit of homework in order to make that happen. The way on how you can define trusted building blocks, I was quickly walking over that, is 100% in line with the descriptions in the DSSC. DSSC will often say you need to identify something that provides authentication or cataloging and whatever. What we're doing here is we're not saying it has to be this or that. We're saying that for your data space that you define through a data space authority in the DSSC, you can use this framework to declare what are the trustworthy services. That's a very important function of the DSSC. I believe it's totally compatible. Judita doesn't, but...
X. Now I'm looking a little bit towards the time because we have some, actually one presentation left. Thanks for the time. Thanks a lot for keeping with us, keeping with the conceptual model. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Klaus. I think we need to change